Hi, in this tutorial, Tutorial 5, Section 6, Part 4, we will be working on a menu system for the Tab Container Experiment program. First, I will be discussing some common graphical menu conventions. I will also be covering some user interface best practices and some GAMBAS-specific menu system and menu editor characteristics. Then we will create a menu system for the Tab program's menu operations. The menus that we will place into the Tab Experiment program at this time represent some of the more familiar menus that any typical computer user will recognize. I have chosen these menus because they are so ubiquitous and their common functionality is extremely well known and consistent across virtually all established programs which a user is likely to encounter. These common menus include a File menu, an Edit menu, an Insert menu, a View menu, and a Help menu. The first common top-level or root menu is the File menu. This menu is usually associated with three common elements, and we are going to place examples of those menu elements on the Tab program's File menu. First, the File menu is where many programs create or manipulate new documents or projects that are related to the functionality that is specific to the program itself. So we are going to create a new document entry in which we are going to create the ability to clear and start a new text document. This menu option will interact with the text area on tab 3, clearing the text area. You will notice that the new menu option has an arrow to the right of the word New. This arrow indicates to a user that there is another submenu available if that menu option is clicked. Our program will have the option of essentially creating a new text document by clearing the current text document area, thereby, in this example, creating an empty or new text object. Here, another common characteristic of most modern programs, which you should note and I encourage you to follow, is to confirm the user's intention whenever replacing any user-created changes, by asking the user to confirm any such changes before eliminating any earlier user-created content. When we finish polishing the final code actions for the menu system, I will demonstrate this type of program action. Next, typically within the File menu, are file operations such as opening, closing, and saving any files associated with the program. Hence this common root menu's identity. Typical file operations are open, save, and save as, so the Tab program's File menu will contain these options. However, since those actions would necessitate using GAMBAS file input-output operations, which haven't been covered in the tutorials yet, we are going to use the GAMBAS Menu Editor to disable those menu choices. The menu options will still be visible and can be enabled and coded at any time that you feel comfortable with the underlying programming. But those file operations will be visibly non-functional while the Tab program is running at this time. I have included these file-specific operations on the Tab program's menu for demonstration purposes to comply with the general menu structure conventions that users have come to expect. You should note I am including such visible but disabled functionality as a conscious user interface paradigm choice. Showing and hiding functionality options dynamically while a program is running based upon the current state of the program's use and expected functionality is a matter of some design contention, especially with regards to UI items such as menus and toolbars. I personally follow the school of thought which has concluded that most users are far more comfortable with and more easily adapt to static user interfaces which simply indicate that certain options may not be available at all times, as opposed to removing UI elements that are not necessarily applicable at a given point while the program is running. In general, my personal experience with users is that it is less difficult to see an option and also see that it is not currently available, because the option's use may not actually be applicable within the current context of the program's use, rather than a user being confronted with being unable to find an option that they have seen previously. Research has shown that context will usually be of a lower priority to a user than the comfort of an unchanging environment in which the software will more gently remind them that what they are trying to accomplish, or the way that they are trying to accomplish it at that moment, may not necessarily make logical sense within the current context of the program. Again, opinions on the most effective user interface design is a matter of some quite extensive and often very lively debate. So I simply offer my personal observations and opinions on these programming matters. You should treat them as suggestions and advice. However, you should also feel absolutely free to use or create any user interface paradigm that you feel is appropriate. As I have said before, styles and conventions change, and there is usually no one right way to accomplish a program task. And my reason behind this tutorial series is based on the goal of making computers accessible, interesting, and especially fun. So experiment, try things out, observe what others are doing, and especially if you are writing programs for others, try to utilize feedback from your users. Returning to the File menu, the last option typically found on a file menu is a Quit or Exit option. This option closes the overall program and any associated resources or files. And again, this action will often ask for confirmation to prevent the program's user from losing any work if any changes have been made prior to shutdown. Another common menu, which I am including here, is an Edit menu. Edit menus allow program-specific editing of the operational elements within a program, such as user-created documents, content, and projects. This menu usually provides the functionality associated with undoing previous user actions, performing search actions, and setting and saving user preferences. Edit menus will often have commands to undo and redo the latest user actions, such as user typing or making changes to the current user content. So I am including this option on the Tab Programs menu. However, since this type of program operation effectively requires recording all keystrokes and other user actions, and would also require the ability to step backwards through those actions step by step to reverse any changes made by a user, this type of program action would also require its own somewhat extensive program code. So while I am including such options for demonstration purposes, this particular edit functionality will also be disabled at this time. You should note that some menu commands, such as this undo command, can also often be called via well-known keyboard shortcuts. In this case, for this edit menu option, the typical keyboard shortcut for an undo command is the Control key plus the letter Z key combination. So when we create this menu system for the Tab program, we will be using the GAMBAS Menu Editor to create this keyboard shortcut for this menu item. Another action commonly found on edit menus is a search option. This function is used to find and modify specific user-created data within a document or project. For example, a word processor's search and replace functionality is usually found on the Edit menu. This type of menu option also calls a somewhat sophisticated subprogram, which is specifically designed to assist a user to search through and, if needed, replace the elements of user-created content while a program is being used. Again, Since such an operation necessarily uses more advanced programming and data manipulation techniques in and of itself, we will include this option on the Edit menu, but we will be disabling this option using the menu editor for this version of the program. Another commonly seen element of the Edit menu is a choice to alter or save any configuration options or the user interface preferences for a program. These options may contain specific visual or user selectable characteristics which are persistently applicable to the overall user interface or program functionality. Preference or configuration editor functionality requires both file input-output and is best accomplished using multiple forms, topics which will be covered in depth in later GAMBAS tutorials. That concludes the basic functionality of common edit menus. In this edit menu example, we are going to add some typical menu entries for demonstration purposes, so you can become comfortable with common menu conventions and experiment with creating more advanced menu systems in the menu editor. And I am discussing their general functionality so you can know where such program elements commonly appear. However, we will use the menu editor to disable those particular options which would require program methods which haven't been covered yet. So these menu choices will appear on the menu as grayed out options while the example program is running. As you can see, we still have a lot of interesting program topics to cover. Some of them would be considered somewhat intermediate level programming, and while we need to cover a few more of the basics before coding such functionality, do not feel that you must wait to experiment and create your own programs and program elements. And remember, you can always simply re-enable such menu entries in the menu editor at any point that you are ready to code them. Or you can use the menu editor to hide or permanently remove such menu elements if you decide you don't need them in your menus. This type of user interface experimentation can be very useful while you are designing your user interface and as you finalize your program's UI layout. The next common menu that will be part of the tab program's menu system is an insert menu. Insert menus are used to place additional data elements within a program's working user data. For example, placing a word, image, or data block within an existing project or document. The tab program will have the ability to insert character strings into the text area. For this programming example, these formatted text strings will be added to the end of the current contents of the text area. In the first insert option, the catchphrase can be any word or collection of words which you wish to add to a text document. And the document closing insert option will be a standard letter type closing statement. Later, we will also use some additional code to polish the functionality of the insert menu to improve the user experience. That concludes the basic functionality of our insert menu. Another common menu is a view menu. View menus are where a user controls the visible elements within a program. For example, elements of the user interface are typically turned on and off or configured within a program's view menu. The view menu within the tab program will allow a user to make certain controls visible or hidden while the program is running. The tab program's view menu will also allow the user to view which program tab is currently active and switch between the different tabs. This section of the view menu will allow the user to independently make the checkboxes and radio buttons visible or invisible while the program is running. And this collection of menu radio buttons on the view menu will display and select which tab on the tab control is currently active. As you have probably concluded, from a purely practical standpoint, this latter functionality does not really serve an effective purpose in this program. It is being done for demonstration purposes and to better demonstrate menu radio buttons and controlling tab controls through program code. This program code functionality will be used later when we are polishing the final user interface functionality to create a better user experience. The final menu in the tab program is a help menu. Help menus provide useful information about a program and its use. The help options may include everything from simple information about the program, such as the version and the program's origin, through indexed documents describing program functionality, all the way up to sophisticated subprograms which explain precisely how to perform complex operations within a program. The help menu may even contain direct access to online help resources, provided the computer has internet access. This demo program will have very simple help options at this time. The program will have a general program help item, as an example of the types of help options typically found within most programs. In our example tab program, this menu entry will actually call a generic subroutine, which we are adding, designed to tell the user that certain options are unavailable at this time. The tab program's help menu will also have an About menu item, which will display the program's version and author information. Additionally, both of these help menu items will also have shortcut keys assigned to them, to allow a user to access the help menu options without the need of navigating through the tab program's menu system. That concludes the overview of general menu conventions and the tab program's menus, which we will be creating. Next, we are going to construct the framework of the menu system, consisting of all of the menu items within the tab program's menu system. At this time, I am going to describe some additional elements and functionality within the GAMBAS Menu Editor, and I will cover in more detail the effects that these properties have on a program's menu options. First, as discussed earlier, each GAMBAS menu item must have a unique object name. This location in the right-hand pane of the menu editor shows both the currently selected object's name and allows the programmer to set the name of the selected menu entry. Normally, one of the first things that a programmer should do while creating menu objects is to create easily identifiable menu object names. This is very useful when you start coding the menu options within the program's class file. Two useful things to note are that the menu editor generally prevents a programmer from inadvertently using an invalid object name or from using the same name for multiple objects. And also note that it is a very good idea to employ a uniform naming convention for program code objects. Typically, menu object names should begin with an identifier which makes the menu item's code blocks easy to find within the program code. For example, I begin the name of each menu item with the word menu, followed by an underscore. The underscore character generally improves code readability. You will also frequently see programmers use the three-letter abbreviation MNU followed by an underscore for this purpose. The precise conventions used in naming the various objects within a program is mostly a matter of style. However, consistency is very important, especially if multiple programmers are working on the same program code. Remember, all of these conventions exist merely to make it easier to identify program objects and code blocks within the class file. So most of these practices are designed to improve the coding experience. This field in the menu editor allows the programmer to set the actual text which is displayed within the menu at runtime. This is what the user will see while using the program. Next, this location in the menu editor allows the assignment of shortcut key combinations to the various menu choices. If the assigned key combination is pressed by a user at runtime, the action produces the same result as clicking on the actual menu choice, thereby triggering the menu object's event and running the associated menu code block. It should be noted that using certain key combinations to perform commonly known functionality has become fairly universally consistent across many different programs. And if you use such well-known key combinations to call familiar functionality in your programs, users will tend to be more comfortable using your programs. So I tend to recommend following such conventions whenever it is practical. Within the GAMBAS Menu Editor, these key combinations can include the Control key, the Shift key, or the Alt key. Then within the menu editor, a letter is also selected. Clicking on the letter area of the menu editor brings up a pop-up box containing the available keyboard options. As I stated, there are a number of common conventions associated with various menu option key combinations, which I suggest you generally follow. However, realistically, there are no hard rules. Often, the first letter of a function's name is used, unless multiple program functions start with the same letter, in which case it becomes more of an arbitrary choice by the programmer. This area of the menu editor controls the specific properties of the individual menu entries and the type of individual menu selections, such as whether it is a checkbox or a radio button. This property determines whether the menu item appears on the menu at runtime. Therefore, this property is used to hide or show existing menu objects at runtime without necessarily permanently removing or disabling them from the list of menu items. The ability to hide or show a menu option can be performed at both design time using the menu editor and at runtime through program code. And the enabled property provides the ability to continue to display the option on the menu at runtime without visibly removing the menu item. Disabling a menu item causes the menu item to appear grayed out at runtime and prevents the menu object's code block from running when a user clicks the item. The ability to disable or enable a menu option can also be performed at both design time using the menu editor and at runtime through program code. Here, at design time, the programmer can define the type and status of a menu entry. The toggle option defines a menu item as a checkbox. A menu checkbox functions just like a regular checkbox control and can be set as checked or unchecked, both at design time and at runtime. And as checkboxes, each checkbox menu entry exists and functions independently, regardless of the state of other checkboxes within the overall menu or submenu. Remember, all enabled menu checkboxes trigger a click event in code when selected by a user at runtime, and the current status of a menu checkbox can be accessed via program code at any point while the program is running. The radio option defines a menu item as a radio button type menu item. This type of menu item also triggers a click event in code when selected at runtime, and the current status of the menu object can also be accessed via code. As a radio button, though, only one menu entry can be selected at a time within each menu section. However, each radio button in a menu section functions independently of the radio buttons in other drop-down sub-menus. This option within the menu editor allows you to select the initial status of the checkbox and radio button menu items. At this time, I would like to point out another quirk that I've discovered in GAMBAS Menu Radio Buttons. Within the menu editor, directly setting the checked property for the radio buttons can override the standard exclusivity functionality of the radio buttons, and multiple radio buttons can be set simultaneously when the program is launched. You should also note that multiple radio buttons in the same menu section can also be set at the same time through program code at runtime. This quirk can defeat the standard functionality and purpose of the radio button elements. So I will be demonstrating a code fix for this issue when we code the menus. However, you should be aware of these menu radio button quirks and address them to ensure that the menu radio buttons function in the expected manner, so that these quirks do not interfere with your program's functionality or confuse your users. That concludes the menu item type and status section of the menu editor. Now we will move on to creating the menu system for the Tab Experiment program. After relaunching the Tab Program project within the IDE, use Save As to create a new version of the experimental program. The new project can be named Tab Program Experiment 1B. This will be the version to which we add the menu system. At this point, I would like to offer a little more general programming advice. While the GAMBAS IDE is extremely flexible, and it is very easy to simply code completely spontaneously on many projects, it is usually a good practice to at least rough out your ideas before you actually begin coding any project that has any genuine complexity. Laying out your goals, your user interface, and a general structure for your programs allows you to develop the best strategies and general program design, which will allow you to follow the best path forward to achieve an effective result. This preliminary work can be done on paper, in a text document, or in the IDE itself. But having at least a general description of your final goal is almost always the best starting point. This approach can save you immeasurable frustration, since you can avoid, figuratively, coding yourself into a corner. A little planning helps a programmer avoid sloppy or redundant elements, and a lack of a clear goal can force you to redesign, rework, and troubleshoot your project endlessly. This would defeat the purpose of enjoying the experience of programming. So, moving forward, here is the list of menu items that will be in the Tab Program's menu system. Remember, the elements on the View menu's submenus will consist of checkbox and radio button menu items. Assessing the overall structure of the intended menu system, we can count the actual menu items. A quick count shows a total of 26 menu items. So the first thing we will need to do within the menu editor will be to create 26 menu items for the menu system. So launch the menu editor and insert 26 new menu items. Remember, we are creating 5 top-level root menus, and the rest of the menu items will be organized under those top menus. So after we have inserted all of the menu items, the first thing we should do is to rename the captions of the top-level menu items. This will make managing the menus within the menu editor much easier. Change the caption property of Menu 1 to File. Change the caption of Menu 8 to Edit. Change the caption of menu 12 to Insert. Change the caption of menu 15 to View. And lastly, change the caption of menu 24 to Help. Next, under the first menu item, the File menu, indent the next 6 menu entries. This can be done as a group. Select the first item to be indented and hold down the Shift key and select the last item to be indented. After they are all selected, click the Indent Quick button on the Menu Editor toolbar. Again, note, you can also select each of the menu items to be indented individually and indent each one at a time, if you prefer. I simply find this method of group modification to be faster and more convenient. If you make a mistake, you can always change or correct any object in the list pane later. Move to each group of submenus, the group of menu items under each root menu. Select and indent them. Next, under the File menu, since we want a submenu entry identified as New and then a submenu entry identified as Document, we will add a second level of indentation to the second indented item under the File menu. This second indentation will place the third item in the menu as a submenu entry under the first submenu. This additional level of menu items will also automatically create an arrow to the right of the first File submenu option. This indicates to a user that there is an additional layer of choices attached to the first option in the File menu. Next, we want to set all of the actual menu captions. The menu captions for the items within the File menu, starting at the top, are New and Document, followed by Open, Save, Save As, and finally Quit. Then, under the Edit menu, set the first menu item caption to Undo. We will also add a keyboard shortcut to this menu option using the Menu Editor. This shortcut key combination will allow a user to call this menu action by pressing Ctrl-Z. To do this, while the Undo menu item is selected, tick the Control entry in the right-hand side of the Menu Editor. Next, click the key options to bring up the key selection pop-up and pick the letter Z. When you do this, you will see that Ctrl+Z appears next to the word Undo within the Menu Editor window. This key combination will also appear on the menu at runtime. Next, set the caption for the search entry in the Edit menu. And then the Preferences entry. And in the next top-level menu, the Insert menu, we will add the options Catchphrase followed by Document Closing. Next is the View menu. The View menu contains the most menu items. This is where the user can set the program's radio buttons and checkboxes to be visible or invisible at runtime. So the next two menu item captions will be Exclusive Choices and Inclusive Choices. We want these first two options to appear as checkbox type menu options. This will allow a user to turn these controls on and off from the View menu. To set these menu items as checkboxes in the menu editor, we tick the toggle property. This is the menu editor's name for a checkbox. We need to do this for both of these menu items. We also need to set these menu items to checked, because we are making the radio buttons and the checkboxes visible by default when the program launches. To do this, we also tick the Checked property for both menu items. Next on the View menu are the available tabs controlled as radio buttons. This radio button property is also set in the menu editor, and once coded, the View menu will allow a user to select and thereby view the currently active tab from within this menu at runtime. The available tabs within the program are the Choices tab, the Slider tab, the Text tab, the Buttons tab, the Drop-Down tab, and the Picture tab. Remember to set these menu items as radio button type menu items. Then set the first option, the Choices tab option, as checked so that the first tab is set as the default item when the program launches. Finally, under the Help menu, there are two Help menu items. Change the captions for the first Help menu item to the words Tab Program space dash space Help, and change the second Help menu item to the word About. We will also be adding keyboard shortcuts to these Help menu entries. Remember, menu keyboard shortcuts trigger the execution of the menu code blocks without a user having to select the option directly from the menu. For the first Help menu entry, select the F1 key from the pop-up list of keyboard keys. I am using this key because the F1 key is one of the most commonly used keys for help functions within many different programs. Then, for the Help menu's About menu entry, create a keyboard shortcut in the Menu Editor by selecting both the Shift property and the F1 key. I intentionally chose these keyboard shortcuts for these two closely related menu items to maintain an internal consistency in the program, since the final result of these particular keyboard shortcut choices is that pressing the F1 key will bring up the program Help option, and holding down the Shift key while pressing the F1 key will bring up the associated Help About menu option. And I generally recommend implementing such well-known and internally consistent elements of program operation whenever possible, simply as a matter of effective user interface design. Now that we have completed the layout of the menu system, with the root menus and submenus displaying their final captions, we need to rename each of the actual menu item objects to make coding easier. It is best to always use a clear and consistent naming convention for naming program objects. In this case, this means adopting a naming convention which will best facilitate identifying and working with the menu code blocks within the class file. This can be done by creating a descriptive name for each menu object, which starts by identifying the object as a menu item. For example, I begin each menu entry with the word menu, followed by an underscore, and then simply use the names of the menu items that represent the chain of menu functionality and ends with the actual menu item itself. Again, separating words with underscores to make the code easier to read. An example would be menu underscore file underscore save. A consistent method like this makes it much simpler to read and work on the blocks of code. This is especially true if other programmers need to work with your code. This can also be very useful for you when you come back to a program after an extended period of time. In this program's case, I would just start at the top of the menu items within the menu editor and move systematically through the list, making the modifications. I also recommend using copying and pasting whenever possible to make the process easier. Finally, click the OK button to apply all of the menu elements to the program. Go ahead and save the project. Now that the menu system has been created, we can examine the menus within the IDE. The first thing I am going to do is disable those menu entries that we are not going to code at this time. The menu entries that will not be coded at this time are the Open, Save, and Save As entries in the File menu. I will also be disabling the Undo and Search entries in the Edit menu. Next, I will be disabling the Tab Program Help entry in the Help menu. After these menu entries are disabled, they will still be visible on the menus, and they can be re-enabled at any time. They will simply no longer be active menu options. To disable these menu entries, relaunch the menu editor. Click on the chosen menu entries in the menu item list in the left-hand pane of the menu editor and untick the enabled property in the Properties area of the menu editor's right-hand pane. I am now also going to add 5 separators and place them in locations that I feel improve the visual appearance and functionality of the menus. To do this, click on the last item in the menu list and click the Add Separator Quick button on the menu editor's toolbar 5 times. Then rename the separators to Separator 1 through Separator 5. This is just to make the menu objects easier to identify. After the separators have been created and renamed, I am going to select each separator and use the menu editor's Move Up and Move Down Quick buttons to move them to the appropriate positions. In this case, within the File menu, I am separating the file-specific operations from the other options within that drop-down menu. I am also separating all 3 options on the Edit menu and separating the checkboxes from the radio buttons on the View menu. Finally, I am removing the ellipses, the 3 dots after the Save option on the File menu. I am making this correction to conform to the convention that ellipses after a choice are meant to connote that a user will have additional options presented to them after selecting that particular choice. In this case, since the Save menu option is usually immediately implemented without the need of further user input, I decided to remove the ellipses from this menu item. Now we can inspect the menu, both in the IDE and by running the program. Save the project again and inspect the menu system in the IDE. If it looks good, you can run the project and inspect the menus in the running program. Close the program. If everything looks good, we can move on to the next section. If there is a problem, simply relaunch the menu editor in the IDE and make any necessary adjustments, and re-examine your work until the menu system looks the way you want it to appear. In the next tutorial, Tutorial 5, Section 6, Part 5, we will begin coding the various menu options. I will start by creating a new subroutine to explain to the user that certain program options are not available. Once this subroutine has been added to the program's class file, this subroutine will be available to be used by any of the various menu options code blocks. Then we will start systematically coding each of the enabled menu entries. Again, thanks for taking a look at these videos and joining me as I explore the GAMBAS language and making these videos. I hope you find them useful.